big warm welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining the second presentation on the web of meaning. And I hope you joined the first presentation of Carolyn a month ago. And very much look forward to hearing from her again on this wonderful book. We're not going to have, unfortunately, Jim with us today because he is probably in fact, because as of this Saturday, we are starting our yearly Charter Academy course, which has been turned to an online course for the past 2 years because of the pandemic. But now we are getting back to the in-person meeting. And if you can come, please do so, because we already have around 90 people together, and we have a full days of for 6-7 days in Chartres, and it will be a wonderful course. But anyhow, I don't really want to keep the time away from the Web of Meaning. Now over to you, Carolyn. Thank you very much in advance.
Thank you, Georgie. It's good to be here again and to continue with this wonderful book that I began to present on last month, The Web of Meaning by Jeremy Lent. And what I want to do today is I'm going to give you a little bit of a review of what we talked about last month regarding this book, but I also want to weave into The Web of Meaning another book that I have discovered in the meantime, and I'll say more about that in a moment. But first, I want to go back to some of the highlights of The Web of Meaning by Jeremy Lent, who was born in London and wrote a book, I think in 2017, called The Patterning Instinct, a cultural history of humanity's search for meaning. And then his next book, The Web of Meaning, was in 2021. And the subtitle of that book, The Web of Meaning, is Integrating Science and Traditional Wisdom to Find Our Place in the Universe. In 2017, in The Patterning Instinct, he talked about the culture, the way culture shapes values and the way those values shape history. And in particular, in evaluating the current crisis of sustainability or what is happening with our planet, he argues that it's not an inevitable result of human nature. A lot of times we hear that, well, this plundering and pillaging of our planet is just the result of how humans are. He argues that is not true, but that it is culturally driven, that it's a product of particular mental patterns that could conceivably be reshaped. And last time we talked about the contrast between his perspective and the newer perspective of Jem Bendell, who founded the Deep Adaptation Movement, who argues that this collapse is inevitable. Bendell does. Whereas Lent is saying, well, it could be eliminated or lessened in its severity if our patterning was changed. So in order to fully understand the Web of Meaning book, we have to understand what he means by the patterning instinct. The patterning instinct refers to patterns of meaning that cultures throughout history, including our own, have constructed. It reveals the underlying layers of our current dominant culture that's rapidly driving us to destruction. And I'm talking here about Western culture primarily. So making meaning, from Jeremy Lent's perspective, helps reshape our patterns. He argues that the more we embrace the web of interconnectedness in our perspective of the world, the more life makes sense and reveals an intrinsic purpose. On the other hand, the more disconnected and mechanistic our worldview is, the less likely we are to experience a sense of meaning and purpose. So Web of Meaning is focused on finding ways to live in such a way that enhances life and life's deep purpose rather than working against it. And there's one principle that he brought up in the book that we spent a little bit of time with last time. He refers to Aristotle's perspective of two forms of happiness. One form of happiness is hedonia, Hedonia, and eudaimonia, Eudaimonia. Hedonia refers to transient states of happiness that arise from pleasure and power, which of course we see all around us in the current perspective of our planet from the viewpoint of Western culture. Eudaimonia, however, refers to a state arising from fulfilling one's true nature. And it's this focus on fulfilling our true nature, according to Aristotle, that can allow us to flourish even in the face of adversity. So with those very important points in mind, I'd like to launch now into the second part of this book, or second part of my presentation, which is going to focus on the last chapter of Lent's book. And that chapter is called Weaving a New Story of Meaning. And as I comment on this chapter, I will also weave into my commentary that book that I mentioned a while ago that I discovered since my last presentation on the Web of Meaning, which is Hospicing Modernity, Facing Humanity's Wrongs and the Implications for Social Activism, by Vanessa Machado de Oliveira. I'll repeat that. Hospicing Modernity, Facing Humanity's Wrongs and the Implications for Social Activism, by Vanessa Machado de Oliveira. I'm doing this because there's a way in which she takes the notion of weaving a new story to the next level. This last chapter in Lent's book, Weaving a New Story, a Web of Meaning, I think that Machado takes this further than Lent did. And I find that very exciting, challenging, but exciting. Now, we all want to have and live a new story of humanity. But while that sounds inviting and sometimes exciting, it's much more difficult and daunting than we realize. One of the first challenges that Lent throws out is the need to redefine our notions of progress. On the one hand, we may be enamored with the amount of progress that we've witnessed in our lifetimes, but we always have to ask the question, progress for whom and at what cost? We've created a modern world, or modernity, as Machado names it, that unarguably has made our lives and the lives of much of the world's population much better, but at the expense of exploiting nature, because we believe we're separate from nature, and invariably with that, exploiting each other because we believe we're separate from each other. Lent says that an ecologically based civilization would optimize eudaimonia rather than hedonia, and that the overriding objective would be to create conditions for all humans and really for all living beings to flourish as part of a thriving, flourishing earth. Now, just to remember, eudaimonia results from focusing on meaning as opposed to grasping and gratification. In such a world that focuses on eudaimonia, harmony arises not through homogeneity, but through each organism contributing to the whole by pursuing its own eudaimonia. In other words, you pursue your eudaimonia, your sense of meaning and purpose. And the frog pursues its notion of eudaimonia in the frog world. And the elephant pursues its notion of eudaimonia in its world. And that is acceptable to humans. So there's a great celebration of diversity because the citizens of the world realize that their overall health depends on different groups developing their own unique gifts to the greatest possible extent. Now, all of this sounds lovely, right? We all want to create this kind of world, yes? And yet, Vanessa Machado in Hospicing Modernity invites us to take a deep dive into what this project requires, because the first thing it requires is to be willing to hospice modernity. What does she mean by this? Well, obviously, if you've ever worked in a hospice situation, you are literally supporting and assisting another person in dying. So as we volunteer to hospice modernity, we are supporting and assisting modernity to shed, to terminate certain qualities. And that's a long process, maybe longer than the dying of a human being. The dying of a human being might take a couple of years, or in some cases, a couple of weeks. But the hospicing of modernity takes much longer. However, as external events unfold, it may take less time. If we looked at, say, hospicing modernity in Europe 20 years ago, we might say, well, that's going to take a long time. But if we look at it from the perspective of this summer and the drastic extreme weather, the heat and the drought, that process may not seem so long. Let's talk more deeply about what Machado actually means by this term. She says, quote, "Modernity is a single story of progress, development, human evolution, and civilization that is omnipresent. Modernity is full of paradoxes, of war and humanitarian support, of ongoing colonialism and reconciliation, of imperialism and education, of poverty creation and alleviation, of exponential growth and sustainability. Whether you and I identify with or are critical of it it still conditions how we think, feel, desire, relate, hope, and imagine. In other words, we can reject most of modernity, but even so, we've been profoundly influenced by it and continue to be influenced by it. And she continues, although modernity always sees itself and behaves as if it is eternally young, it has grown old and is facing its end. Learning to offer palliative care to modernity dying within and around us is not something that modernity itself can teach us to do. In other words, most people will not willingly let go of the enjoyments and securities offered by modernity. They will not voluntarily part with harmful habits of being that are extremely pleasurable. However, our collective unconscious knows that the enjoyments and securities promised by modernity cannot be endlessly sustained. And that's the end of her quote. And I would just say that Machado's book is about preparing ourselves for coexisting differently whenever these enjoyments and securities might be taken away, whether or not this happens in our lifetimes. So here's a really important point about that quote. She wants us to really get what modernity has done to us and how deeply it has impaired our efforts to create a new story. One of the things that I love about her book is that she is so transparent about her intentions and so insistent that we face how difficult it is to extricate ourselves from the influence of modernity. But her book doesn't just continually shine a light on how bound to modernity we are. She also seeks to create a container for us. And with this in mind, she writes, quote, what I present in this book are translations of what I have been taught about modernity, keeping us in an immature state, and the need for a political practice of healing, of radical tenderness that can enable us to step up, to grow up, and to show up differently. This involves unlearning our learned ways of thinking and imagining, of sensing and feeling, of relating to one another, the earth and the cosmos, of facing life, fear, pain, loss, and death. The stories I offer are gifted as a compass that points to the need for us all to become healthy elders and good ancestors for all of our relations. To learn to live, to grieve, and to die well. This requires, this is her words, this requires that we learn how to face our shadows, how to compost our shit, and how to weather storms together. For this to happen, we need a container where we can manifest unconditional regard for everyone's being, while we commit to interrogating our thinking, our doing, our hopes and desires, and our ways of relating in order to breathe and to move together with maturity, sobriety, discernment, and accountability. This book is an attempt to create that container. Now just take a moment to breathe and let that sink in. I would certainly say that given the daunting and huge task that she lays out before us. This is really not something we can do on our own. Because if you think about it, doing major tasks on our own is part of what has gotten us where we are. So I think that Machado's book is an ideal guide for groups of people who want to do this together. And I think that together is a key word here, because modernity is all about separation and individual achievement. Inherent in her indigenous perspective is the need to hospice modernity together with mutual support. So how does this relate to Lent and his last chapter, Weaving a New Story? Well, Machado would certainly celebrate what Lent writes in the last chapter of Web of Meaning, but she wants us to be clear-eyed about the cost. In fact, at several points in the book, she stops the reader, and I found this refreshing and also kind of shocking in a way. She keeps stopping the reader by saying, look, I want to continue reading. It's clear that she's not going to be offended if we stop. But at one point, she even says, you know, if you don't want to continue reading this book, you can just put it down now. You can give it to someone else. I won't be offended if you do that. To give you a feel for what I'm talking about, this is how she ends the first chapter. She says, quote, "What if racism, colonialism, and all other forms of toxic, contagious divisions are preventable social diseases? What if the texts, education, and forms of organization we revere have carried and spread the disease, but also contain latent parts of the medicine that can heal it? What if learning to activate this medicine requires coming to terms with our violent histories, as painful as that may be, learning to see the world through the eyes of others, impossible as that sounds, and facing humanity in our own selves first, in its full complexity, affliction, and imperfection? What if the purging prompted by this medicine leads us to confront our traumas and to learn to let go of fears of scarcity, loneliness, worthlessness, guilt, and shame? What if we must learn to trust each other without guarantees? What if the motivation to survive alongside one another in a finite planet in dynamic balance, without written agreements, coercive enforcements, or assurances, will come through being taught collectively by the disease itself? What if collective healing will be made possible precisely by facing together the end of the world as we know it?" Unquote. So once again, pause and breathe and take a moment to let her words sink in. Let me make clear that from my perspective, there's nothing wrong with Lent's analysis of our predicament and how we got here. But he doesn't go where Machado goes in terms of diagnosing our modernity infection and showing us how to begin treating it. Perhaps it's because he lacks the indigenous roots that Machado brings to the conversation. And for that reason, I'm grateful that in the middle of preparing the second part of this presentation on the Web of Meaning, I discovered hospicing modernity. Machado says, quote, "I would like to see modernity replaced by a different system. Some of those believe modernity is stuck in self-infantilizing behavior. Some see it recklessly crossing several tipping points leading to its decline. Others see it as approaching or already past its expiration date. Some believe a genuinely new system is only possible if we are able to learn the lessons that modernity has to offer in its decline." This book resonates with that latter position. So let me repeat that last part. Some believe a genuinely new system is only possible if we are able to learn the lessons that modernity has to offer in its decline. So how do we hospice modernity? Well, there are many points in the book where she talks about this, but I want to highlight this one place where she talks about 4 major denials that we have to confront in order to get the most out of this dying process. There are at least 4 main constitutive denials sanctioned within modernity, or colonialism, if you want to use that word, that severely restrict our capacity to sense, relate, and imagine anything else. The first denial is the denial of systemic, historical, and ongoing violence and of complicity in harm. The fact that our comforts, securities, and enjoyments are subsidized by expropriation and exploitation elsewhere. I'm going to repeat that. The first denial is the denial of systemic, historical, and ongoing violence and of complicity in harm. The fact that our comforts, securities, and enjoyments are subsidized by expropriation and exploitation elsewhere. The second denial, number 2, the denial of the limits of the planet and of the unsustainability of modernity, or colonialism, if you like. The fact that the finite Earth metabolism cannot sustain exponential growth, consumption, extraction, exploitation, and expropriation indefinitely. I'll repeat that also. The denial of the limits of the planet and of the unsustainability of modernity colonialism, the fact that the finite Earth metabolism cannot sustain exponential growth, consumption, extraction, exploitation, and expropriation indefinitely. The third denial, the denial of entanglement, our insistence in seeing ourselves as separate from each other and the land, rather than entangled within a wider living metabolism that is bio-intelligent. Repeating that again. The denial of entanglement, our insistence in seeing ourselves as separate from each other and the land, rather than entangled within a wider living metabolism that is bio-intelligent. And finally, the fourth denial, the denial of the magnitude and complexity of the problems we need to face together. The tendency to look for simplistic solutions that make us feel and look good, and that may address symptoms, but not the root causes of our collective complex predicament. Again, the denial of the magnitude and complexity of the problems we need to face together. The tendency to look for simplistic solutions that make us feel good and look good, and that may address symptoms, but not the root causes of our collective complex predicament. So she says that confronting and wrestling with these denials are part and parcel of the invitation to hospice modernity. And she offers an exercise, which I'm not going to take time for us to actually do right now, but here, you might want to write this down and just think about it. This is the exercise. She asks us to look at these 4 denials and then ask ourselves, which of these denials is the strongest in the context of your work? Which of these denials is the strongest in the context of your work? Which of them is the strongest amongst your family and friends? Which of them is the strongest among your family and friends? Which of these denials do you feel most prepared to confront at this moment? Which of these denials do you feel most prepared to confront at this moment? And then finally, which do you think is the most challenging denial for you and why? Which do you think is the most challenging denial for you and why? One of the chapters most relevant to the present moment is called As Things Fall Apart. And I'm going to read you a couple passages from that chapter. She says, the end of modernity may not manifest primarily as economic or ecological collapse, but as a global mental health crisis where the structures of modernity within us start to crumble. Because of the way modernity has socialized us to find security in certainty, stability, and predictability. As things start to fall apart, we will seek out ways to fulfill these desires. We will seek plastic intellectuality, plastic sensuality, plastic artistry. We will shop for plastic certainties that can be consumed in sound bites. We will binge on certainties that can take the bitterness away, give us comfort, lift our hearts, and keep us numbed to the pain for a little longer. And this paragraph, before anything different can happen, before people can sense, hear, relate, and imagine differently, there must be a clearing, a decluttering, an initiation into the unknowable, and a letting go of the desires for certainty, authority, hierarchy, and of insatiable consumption as a mode of relating to everything. We will need a genuine severance that will shatter all projections, anticipations, hopes, and expectations in order to find something we lost about ourselves, about time and space, about the depth of the shit we are in, about the medicines, poisons we carry. This is about pain, about death, about finding a compass, an antidote to separability. This is about being ready to go, to befriend death before we are ready to return home and live as grown-ups. Again, let her words sink in. And I would say that if we are not in this moment in a collective mental health crisis, then I don't know what a mental health crisis is. And she isn't shy about telling us what we need to do to resolve it. So the rest of Machado's book is a manual for how to walk through the pain and lostness and consciously hospice modernity with love, compassion, intention, and courage. I highly recommend Web of Meaning, and from my perspective, it lacks the fuller perspective and indigenous framework that Machado's book offers. I celebrate the activism and the work of creating a new story that we're all doing. But the real fullness of meaning, I believe, requires us to consciously and intentionally hospice the old story as we construct the new one. So I'd like to finish my presentation today with these words, and then we'll have some question time, some discussion. I'd like to finish with the last portion of Mary Oliver's poem, In Blackwater Woods. You may know this poem, and she finished it by saying, "To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, let it go." Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Oh, I love Mary Oliver's work. Oh, that's one of the gratitude I have to the great books that so many great books were introduced to me throughout the years, and this book, The Web of Meaning, is one of those. I actually have a few questions and comments from you, if I may. Just to those who arrived a little bit late, I would like to let you know that our dear Jim is not with us because he's flying from the States to Paris, France. So it's only us chickens, as Jim would say, chickens. So my first comment and question is about Michael's other book, The Patterning Instinct. I read quite a lot of comments that some of the readers of the Web of Meaning prefer the Patterning Instinct more than this one. So
Did they say why? Did they say why?
Some said that actually this book was at some parts a little bit kind of like boring, just going on and on and on about things. But I don't know. You know, everything is very subjective,
Right,
especially taste.
Yeah.
So I'd like to take your really opinion on it. That do you think that there is a certain evolution has been taking place in the Web of Meaning? That is this book so much more augmented in every way, such as wisdom and collecting all the science and the wisdom traditions and really bringing it to a whole into that is the Web of Meaning.
Yeah, I think what he did in Web of Meaning was just really refine and deepen what he was dealing with in the Patterning Instinct. And I did not actually read the Patterning Instinct. I've read parts of it, but I just fell in love with Web of Meaning. And then when I discovered Machado, it's like, oh my God, this is like completely resonant with Web of Meaning, but it goes further.
Yeah.
So that's why I just had to integrate some of what she wrote in today's presentation.
No, thank you for that. Maybe if at all possible, it would be great to have some details of Machado's book, the title and her full name, because I would very much be interested to read the book. And then you were talking about the patterns of meaning that really caught my attention. Is it, and it was really about the cultural aspect to it. So how would you mind to expand on it from your point of view, that what you meant by that? So patterns of meaning, the collective and the individual, and how they actually dance together in that in these patterns.
Yeah. So culture, according to him, really creates these patterns. And in Western culture, it seems like increasingly our patterns have departed from meaning. And the meaning has been all about hedonia. Not just, we think of hedonia or hedonism as just wanting pleasure, but it's more than that. It's this deep satisfaction from grasping and conquering and possessing, with much less interest in the deeper meaning of how can I relate with everything else? Yeah. How can I serve to harmonize and integrate? It's increasingly, the hedonia is increasingly separatist. As he says, and as she says, it's all about, I'm over here cut off in my little silo, and my meaning is about what can I get? I saw a story this morning, which I put in my digest, about how all of the big muckety mucks of the ruling elite, like Bezos and Musk, are waiting with bated breath for the Arctic ice to melt so that they can get in there and gather treasures. Get in there and find out what's been missing, like the ore and the minerals and anything that might be of value to them. They're applauding the ice melt and can't wait to get in there and grasp what is there, at the expense of what that Arctic ice melt is doing and will do to our planet.
Absolutely. Well, there we get a surprise when this pattern of the weather change is going to increase, and that I would like to come back to that a little bit later on when Machado talked about the exponential growth aspect. But let's just kind of circle back, or rather to my notes that I'd like to quiz on, that when she was saying, she mentioned sustainability. And that really is like almost like a mantra word in the past 2 decades or so. But now more and more people are talking about regeneration, because we don't really want to sustain the bad.
No. Exactly. Yeah. I didn't like her choice of words there. I wish she had said something like regeneration, because, sustainability is a contradiction when you're talking about hospicing.
Yes.
You might want to pull out or extract the things that have been of value to take to the next iteration, but not to sustain what we have created.
Absolutely. Exactly. And also the next, when she was saying, you were quoting her, that we need to face our shadows. And there is the next one, which was about the collective healing. And straight away, what I was thinking about Thomas Huber's work on facing our wounds. And I know that Laura Madsen is with us, who is, she's been a long-time student of Thomas. I really would like to get her opinion on these points. And there was another thing that caught my attention when she said, via you, the trust each other without guarantees. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have to have some evolution and work together before we can do that. I would love to sit down and ask her to elaborate on that, because I don't think she means just trust any stranger, but, to trust, I would say, a person who's working with you, who is aligned and who serves a similar purpose, that that will be important going forward as we consent to hospicing modernity. And that's why I can see this book being so helpful in a group context.
Mm-hmm.
A group or an organization of people who really want to create a new story. Let's get together and study this book. And oh, by the way, there'll be times in which I'll have to trust you without a lot of assurance.
Yeah.
You know? Because go ahead.
No, sorry. I actually would like to go further. That I think I do trust strangers, because I think without that I couldn't live. Right. So if I was really just discriminating that, oh well, he or she looks like whatever, and then I trust this person. I think that goes, unless maybe that person does something that, like, you know, they earn that, or other kind of like gifted trust is taken back. But that's, I think, how it goes and should go. And the other point which we discussed before, this exponential growth, when you were talking about the different elements and entanglements, so forth, that clearly there is no such thing as exponential growth. There's limit to everything in our material world, right? So that's what we're talking about. That's where we live. So and that's, I think that goes without saying, also not for us, not for the Bezos, the Musk people, because they just think that is you know, the growth is unlimited.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's ridiculous, and it's such a contradiction. For example, that we want to have all this quote unquote climate action, but we want to cling to exponential growth. And that's impossible. You know, the very fact that you are clinging to exponential growth cancels out any designs that you might have for easing the climate crisis.
Sure.
They can't exist in the same space.
Yeah, and this is where it comes in what you said before, or rather Machado said it: face your shadows individually and collectively, right?
So I must shamelessly promote here my book, which I wrote back in 2015, called what's the title of my book?
You wrote so many books, that's why.
I know, I wrote so many. Okay. The subtitle is The Global Crisis and the Human Shadow. Dark gold.
Wow.
The Global Crisis and the Human Shadow. Very accessible, and it really goes into much more depth. And that was before things got as severe as they are right now in terms of humanity acting out its shadow. So I highly recommend that book to everyone.
Well, thank you for bringing it to our attention. It's excellent title, by the way. Really, really excellent. Excellent. Now, I'd like to, I don't see any hands up or any comments, but if I may, Laura, yes, dear, thank you so much. I'd like to quiz you on this collective healing aspect. Would you mind to share your points of view with us, and then what you heard on Machado's and Michael's book? So let's hear from Laura. Then I see Eric, hands up. Georg, are you able to bring in Laura? Maybe there is an internet issue here. Georg, can you hear us? Hello, Georg. Could you bring in Laura? Hopefully he can hear us. Sometimes the internet is a trickster. Sorry about this glitch, everybody. Hopefully we can. I wish he made me a co-host, then I could bring in Laura and Eric, but sorry about this. We just need to wait for Georg to come back to us. Until, oh, no, there was something. Apologize.
Can people write out their questions, perhaps, in the chat?
Yes, thank you, Eric. He says that he's ready when. Yeah, I just think is that Georg or.
Hi guys.
Hi,
Here I am.
Georg. Yes. We need you to. Would you please allow Laura Medzen in for her comments, and then after that, Eric.
Here we go.
Thank you. Oh, hi, Laura. Laura, can you hear us? Hello, dear. Great to see you. Just unmute.
Unmute. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, beautiful presentation, Caroline.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for introducing Machado. I've already ordered her book.
Good.
Already got online and ordered
Great.
that book because it's so relevant, as Georgie said. It's so relevant to the doctoral work I'm doing and the work I do with Thomas Hubel, who's been a 10-year influence in my life, a profound influence.
Yeah.
And so many points she touches on. It's the most challenging work we can do, really, is looking at ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, there's no question.
Yeah.
And so her courage and her authenticity and finding her feet on the ground, her authentic, she's practicing what she's preaching.
Absolutely.
And I believe that's the connection I felt and why I got so excited about this presentation. I enjoyed last month the presentation of Michael's, but of his book, but I didn't feel inspired in the way I felt today. Like, it was like thrilling hearing her words, because they're the words of truth. And truth has to be a connected truth to make a difference. It has to be embodied. It has to be in relation.
Right.
Because that's what heals. One of Thomas's favorite sayings is, we've been wounded in relation, all of us. And so it's in relation we heal. And it isn't just anybody, so my groups are specific people who have the courage to engage in deep presencing of their wounding, ancestral, collective, individual, because otherwise they run. Like, I've had friends literally run from my work. So there's a thick wall of denial also that's there, and we can't make anybody wrong. Everyone's where they are. So that's been my steep learning curve personally. It's like, oh, you're running from the gold, like you called it dark gold, because that going from I love the hedonistic versus the eudaimonia. Eudaimonia, right. That is a very good analogy, because when we're authentic with our pain, we're authentic with life. And then life holds us in a way that we couldn't do as the isolated, wounded individual that's not connected.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's why I really hope that groups will begin to grab onto her book and utilize it as not just something to study, but something to use and apply, because she talks in there about how important it is to face our traumas and face that which has impaired us from creating a new story. We can't just start creating a new story. We have to look at our impairments.
Exactly. Like, we can't build a new life on top of trauma, and that's why I gravitated so strongly to Thomas's teaching.
I love his work.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I don't want to take it.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say hooray, and thank you for introducing me to this wonderful book. And I'm also going to order your book. It sounds really good. The one you meant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. But do take as much as time you wish in commenting on this subject, because it's so wonderful. Because Thomas's work so much, and there is lots of relation to what you mentioned.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there is so much. One piece that I want to add is how this work came to me, and Georgie knows this already, was as a download. When I started to work intensely with Thomas in what he calls his timeless wisdom training in 2018. So it wasn't, by that point, I'd been facilitating groups with inner silence, inner stillness, how to be in the world but not of it, how to have our spaciousness and be in relation. And so I'd been doing that for 8 years, and then it morphed into this, what I'm now calling, looked like a Star of David when it came in, 6-pointed star, which is really what Thomas calls, and I didn't even know this, so I'm learning what this is. 6 months ago, I thought, oh my God, this inner constellation, these workshops I do are a collective trauma integration process. That's one of Thomas's, if you've read his book, he goes into great depth as to what that is. And the energies that come forward are really unpleasant. And he does a lot of Holocaust shadow, which is one of our deepest shadows collectively. So there's that. And then the other very recent realization is that I needed, in my dissertation, I need to include some form of scripture. And I've been swimming in the Tao through Thomas's influence, the Tao Te Ching. And this whole embodied understanding Thomas lives, that we're walking forever. And when we know that, we have time for now. And that's really the way it works. I have time for you. I can sit here wherever you are with you when I know I'm here forever. Changes everything. But I can't know that from my head. I have to feel that in my body, and that incredible connectivity with all of life that supports that ability to be present. It isn't me being present, it's presence living through me. It's just a different paradigm than the separated self, which is always the traumatized self.
absolutely.
Because trauma only knows itself in separation. It's like I often think, when I feel what's going on in the groups, when a thawing starts to happen, because you can feel it in the group when there's trauma being integrated, there's kind of a heavy, frozen quality, like it feels really slow, and people start going to sleep.
Yeah,
they do. I see them on the screen because I do all my work on Zoom now, and they're like, and that's when the thick traumas coming in, and we're not used to presidency. It just kind of puts us to sleep like that. Yeah.
But Laura, actually, Jill just put a message in a message box saying that you sound fabulously exactly where I am. But after Eric's comment, I would love to hear from Jill that what she meant by that. But yeah,
I'd like to hear from Eric.
Yeah,
before we go into that.
Eric,
You've been waiting patiently, Eric.
Yes,
that's quite all right. It's all good.
Okay.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah. Well, yeah, I was triggered right. Carolyn, you talked about the regeneration, rather using that word rather than sustainability as a way to get into the hospicing of modernity. But and that triggered for me the sense of part of what's necessary for this, the new story, and part of that, as I see it, is really getting at what holds the economic reality, and I use that intentionally because there's been historically, even in the last couple hundred years, there's been a lot of smaller movements for cooperative efforts, working together, bartering, community-based ways of working outside the competitive, separate, accumulate everything. The Musk and those guys, they get, melt the ice cap so we can get the resources, kind of thing. But there's been a lot, and there really have been a lot, but they've all been defeated or overruled or eliminated or brushed to the side. I'm aware of, particularly in the United States, where I am, but and so part of it, I think it's a huge shift that's necessary. How do we work together as a society or in larger than just small communities, which I think has to be a key piece now in this transition. But you know, it's like a mythic change. It's a talk about cultural values. How do we design a way of working, of doing things, you know, producing things and exchanging things? People, we're all caught in so many of us in the need of money or some means of exchange, if that makes sense, you know? And so I'd be really curious to get your take on some of in this realm, in that realm of the means of exchange and how we move rather than just in small groups for this change, because that's a huge piece, I think.
Well, I don't know that there is anything that is authentic hospicing and regeneration other than small communities. What keeps coming to mind for me are situations where you have a tornado, where you have a massive wildfire, and the way in which the status quo is destroyed. And people have absolutely no alternative but to come together and help each other. Now, I know that's temporary with these kinds of disasters because the larger paradigm is still out there and above, you know, and separate from. But this is a microcosm of when that paradigm completely collapses, as it is doing. And I've been writing about it for 15 years, and very few people want to hear about it because it's painful. That in those small communities of people coming together, when they have no big paradigm to resort to, it's just us. It's just us chickens, you might say, dealing with this aftermath. We have to create a new society, a new story. And maybe there's only 100 of us or fewer than that. But this is what we are faced with. And so the more we can stop relying on that larger paradigm and stop thinking in terms of how can we change on a big scale, I think the closer we'll be to authentic hospicing of modernity. That's my sense of it.
Yeah, and that is part of that challenge. I basically agree with you, Carolyn. I think part of that challenge is how for the smaller communities to survive in that transition. When so much of the design is beyond the communities.
Well, many people won't survive.
Yeah, well, I think you're right.
And I've been writing about this. You know, my first book was Sacred Demise, Walking the Spiritual Path of Industrial Civilization's Collapse. And it's not a pretty picture. And it's not something that we can figure out how it's going to look and work ahead of time. We are in very uncharted waters at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
No pun intended for the waters being up to our ears, you know, flooding regions, you know, massive flooding, massive drought. I mean, these extremes are jaw-dropping.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rick. But don't you think that always the waters are uncharted, right? It is by sailing it, we discovering it and how we actually sail it, right? So It's just by doing it, that's how we paved the way forward. But it's not, it is really not pleasant. And I keep saying to people that why is it that all this massive heat we have been having in Europe is just not opening people's eyes, that individually they have to do something, whatever that is, right? Small or big, just do something about it.
I think, Georgie, I think that the unchartedness to accept that is part of the challenge. You know, it's like, because if it's uncharted, we don't know. And so you can't apply the ways that we think we have to do it, because it's all new. Yeah.
And that's where it comes in creativity and imagination and trusting each other and doing it together, small community or big community. And then we're gonna figure it out only if there is a will, there will be a way. Only by doing that. What a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much, Eric and Laura. Well, I asked Jill if she wanted to come in. There is no pressure, dear Jill, if you don't want to. You already have Laura's website address. Are there anybody else from that? And is Rachel, Michael, Wendy, Dave? Anybody would like to make any comment, or Susu? She's with us. Just in case you would like to share your comments and ask any questions, then this is the opportunity. But I can't say it. Just before we actually would close, do you actually have any closing remarks? So what is the most things that jumps out for you from Machado's book and then from Michael's book that was like an aha moment for you? Like, wow, that is just so brilliant, or wow, I didn't know this, or anything. What was that?
Well, I think just the magnitude of the work we need to do, that it's not for sissies, you know, and to really, I know I was struck again on a different level with the depth of work that we need to do and the degree to which we are impaired without doing that work. And the degree to which it's almost nonsensical to think we can create a new story without looking deeply at how we are impaired in our ability to do that. Yeah. But I'm grateful for Machado, and I'm certain that other folks will be coming forth. I want to again shamelessly promote the book that Andrew Harvey and I will be publishing. Well, actually, Inner Traditions will be publishing it in November, called Radical Regeneration.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Fantastic.
Yeah, so
maybe you should come back with Andrew next year and then talk about your.
Absolutely. We would love to. Yeah.
That would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for the closing remarks. There is something going on with the Zoom because Laura posted her website and for Jill, but for whatever reason, we can't really, Jill cannot see that message. So Georg, would you mind to see that what the glitch is?
Let me see, I have, I think it's because you're a panelist now, Laura, you have to select in the chat that you want to.
I realize that, but I can't because I'm a panelist, so I can't send everybody. I can only send a panelist. So,
but you can. It says two, and you have to click on where it says two. Right now it says host and panelist, so you have to go down there and select everyone. On top of where you type in the text.
I always do that. All I see when I click is host and panelists, and then all of your names.
Now I found the setting. Try again now. I found the setting.
Yeah, no, it should be. I had the same before, Georg. I wanted to.
It looks like Zoom has been changing its setting one more time here.
But
now I found it. Now I found it, and now you can chat with anybody.
There, I got now everyone. Okay, here we go, everyone. So Jill should be able to get this.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. No, it's Jill has it now. Well, unless anybody would like to say any words from our audience, then I would like to thank so much for this amazing presentation, the last one, and hope to see you next year with us and talk about your book with Andrew, or maybe another chosen book, because that would be wonderful. You're full of knowledge and wisdom, and it's always great to listen to you and have discussion, because we are in this collective together. So only together we can make it, not apart.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to just introduce that in a month's time we will have our wonderful Brenda Crowther, who will lecture on Jung's book, The Psychology of Kundalini Yoga. So she will be with us September and October, and November, December will be me talking about Michel Montaigne's book on the completed essays. So please join us, and wishing you all the very best to everybody. Have a great summer wherever you are on this beautiful planet, and let's keep the community work together and face our shadows together.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, much love to everybody, and thank you so much for this wonderful presentation again, and Georg, for your facilitation, and all the best to everybody. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.